2015 is a landmark year for global sustainable development, and as we've been touching on in the panel discussion, we had the Sustainable Development Goals, successors to the Millennium Development Goals, agreed in New York just a fortnight ago. Then in December, we'll see COP15, the Paris climate negotiations under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And then third is the WTO Ministerial, the World Trade Organization, MC10 discussions, which are held right here in Nairobi. That's a first for sub-Saharan Africa. And the outcome of all three of these meetings are interlinked, and they will set the international framework for growth over, I think, the next 15 years. The SDGs represent a commitment by world leaders to achieve three extraordinary things by 2030, to end extreme poverty, to fight inequality and injustice, and to tackle climate change. If not addressed, climate change will hamper progress towards Kenya's aim of being a middle-income country by 2030. And of course, the impacts will disproportionately affect vulnerable groups, especially women and those living in the arid and semi-arid lands and coastal regions. Kenya has played and is playing a leading part in these discussions. It steered the SDG negotiations through in New York. It's leading the way on Africa on climate change with, I think, a very ambitious climate change action plan and the investment in renewable energy, of which Mkopa is a part. And Kenya's role in hosting WTO talks is an unparalleled opportunity to push for a fairer trade environment, one that will allow Kenya and other developing and emerging economies to realize their export potential and support sustainable poverty reduction. I'm also proud that my government is helping to lead the way. The UK has committed to 0.7% of GDP for aid, and that's now enshrined in law. And my Prime Minister David Cameron, speaking at the UN, called for us to, quote, leave no one behind. Put simply, that means bringing an end to poverty and to put the poorest, weakest and most marginalised first. PM Cameron also talked of something which he calls the golden thread of development. And in essence, this golden thread recognises that sustainability requires a strong commitment to institutions, governance and the rule of law. Only by tackling conflict, insecurity and corruption can we hope to deliver genuine and lasting growth. Kenya's Vision 2030 has three pillars: social, economic and political. But often we forget that all of these are underpinned horizontally by a fourth pillar, and that is values. Those values are the software. Without them, the hardware, a shared goal of double-digit growth, will not function. A critical part of these values is addressing corruption, as Bob mentioned. Let's call a spade a spade. Corruption is theft from Kenyans. I applaud Safaricom's leadership in this area, last year dismissing 56 employees for corruption. I'd like to recognise, Bob, your personal commitment as a member of the UN Global Compact, alongside organisations like CAM and KEPSA to promote ethical business practices. Of course, corruption is not unique to Kenya, far from it. It's a global problem that we must all work together to counter. Tackling it will allow the private sector to thrive, it will attract investment and ensure the benefits of economic growth are shared amongst all citizens. More broadly, in line with Chapter 6 of the Constitution on Leadership and Integrity, we must ensure the values are in place to build a reliable investment climate in Kenya. This agenda involves issues such as streamlining processes for starting businesses, clarifying tax issues, ensuring work permits are quickly and efficiently issued, and tackling counterfeiting. This should see businesses in Kenya apply strong ethical standards in their operations, joining the business networks, the voluntary global initiatives that I've mentioned. And yes, we should maximise the use of local Kenyan content, sourcing inputs from Kenyan firms, hiring local staff and looking for opportunities for Kenyan businesses to move up the value chain, leading to more and better jobs for poor people.